Hi, and welcome to Surprised by Joy. I'm Rustin, and this is Danielle, and we're part of the ministry staff here at Wayzata Community Church doing this series called Surprised by Joy, a 30-day adventure in the book of Philippians. And we're at the last chapter, and we're digging deep in it because in this last chapter, Paul puts a ton of content by summarizing everything he said in very concise and important words. So we're digging into them deep, and we're going to jump in back at the same passage we read yesterday. So we're going to read Philippians 1 through 7 in the Message, and then again in the NIV to talk about some of the differences and look at what else Paul is telling us to do to bring about this communal unity that he's calling the church to.
Yeah. So for different voices, you should do the Message, and I'll do
Ooh, I like that.
The NIV.
So I urge Euodia and Syntyche to iron out their differences and make up. God doesn't want his children holding grudges. And, oh yes, Syzygus, since you're right there to help them, work things out. Do your best with them. These women worked for the Message hand in hand with Clement and me and with their other veterans, worked as hard as any of us. Remember, their names are also in the book of life. Celebrate God all day, every day. I mean, revel in him. Make it as clear as you can to all you meet that you're on their side, working with them and not against them. Help them see that the master is about to arrive and could show up in any moment. Don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray. Let petitions and praises shape your worries into prayers, letting God know your concerns. Before you know it, a sense of God's wholeness, everything coming together for good, will come and settle you down. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces worry at the center of your life.
And from the NIV. I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. We should talk about that, too. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.
So I just kind of want to focus on this word gentleness, right? He says in verse 5, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say it, rejoice. And then verse 5, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And then in the Message, Eugene Peterson translates it, celebrate God all day, every day. Revel in him. Make it as clear as you can to all that you meet that you're on their side, working with them and not against them. So that's how he translates gentleness.
Yes.
So part of what we know about church work, right, and church in general, and just community in general, is that it just because we have God in our life or we're seeking joy does not mean that everyone is always going to agree or that they're going to get along.
No.
Right? In fact, it's a very central part of community. When you put people together, there's conflict. It's part of it. So it reminds us that each of us has a role to play in creating supportive relationships that are the foundation of joy and they're cause for rejoicing, right? That we all have this work to do. And part of how Paul believes that work is done is through this, what Paul calls gentleness.
Yes.
Let your gentleness be known to everyone. Like it's an imperative in the Greek that emphasizes a specific rather than a general kind of conduct.
Yeah.
Right? So the English gentleness is often associated with being meek or being mild, be gentle to someone. But in the Greek, it's associated with tolerance, not insisting on every right of the letter of the law, right? That I'm not, it's a tolerant space that you don't have to require everything to be dotted and every I to be dotted and T to be crossed. So to embody this kind of scriptural idea of gentleness means to recognize that we have a choice in how we behave towards one another. And it's not just about being nice or kind, it's also about how we choose to exercise our power.
Interesting. Makes sense. Makes a
Right?
ton of sense. Yes.
And you can, just in terms of this singular conflict, we don't know what was going on with Euodia and Syntyche.
Yeah.
We have no idea. But it was big enough that it was affecting the church.
Yeah.
It was big enough that it was becoming the talk of what it meant to be at the church in Philippi.
Yeah.
And like, generally, those kind of struggles have to do with power.
Yeah. Right. And there probably were factions, right? They probably each had a group that was supporting them. And
Which is why I think he says, that piece that you pulled out in the reading, like, their names are also in the book of life. I think that's why he's saying that. Don't forget.
Oh, sure. Because they're not following the rules
Right.
the way that one thought the other
One
should.
Don't forget, they're still in.
Point.
There's no outing them.
Yes.
They're all in.
Yes.
So if they're all in, how do you deal? And I think part of what Paul is saying is we deal with this through gentleness.
Yeah.
So what does gentleness mean to you, Danielle? And how have you personally experienced gentleness? And I mean, like, not the kind of meekness, but actually the kind of somebody choosing to offer their power to you in a way that was beneficial, right? Like they chose not to exercise their power of you or to hold it to this space where it gave you more freedom.
Oh, man.
It's a big question.
That's a huge question that takes, well, I could tell, what's easier to say? When I have not experienced gentleness,
Okay.
of course.
Yeah.
And I am the first to say I also have not exercised gentleness in cases, but what came to mind was when I was in college, I was in a certain Christian ministry, and I had this big crisis of faith in life post-college where I had never given any thought to what I would do after college, so all of a sudden I was in this year of like, oh yeah, I have to get a job, I have to figure out what I'm doing. So one of the things I did was apply to be a part of this, on staff with this ministry, and part of the application process was asking me to list everything I had ever done for God, or everything I had ever done that was maybe a sin. And I remember it was rough. And I remember I was supposed to have multiple interviews. And I remember halfway through the first interview with this man, I said to him, I'm not comfortable with any of this. I don't think this is right. I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do. I think this is my answer, that I'm not supposed to work in this space. Looking back now, 25 years later, it was totally inappropriate. What they were asking, sort of this sense of, looking at every little piece of my life
like
to
a
sort of,
confessional almost.
right, to decide if I was worthy of being on their staff. Who were they to judge that? And who am I to judge someone else when I'm hiring?
Well, and it's right. That's a good power over moment, right? That like somehow any of us are worthy, in some paradigmatic way, that we're more worthy because we've sinned less.
Right.
Like, that's just a broken construct that our evangelical worlds hand to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what came to mind, I think, for me.
That's, I was, I didn't have one either as we were talking, and when I was a pastor in Boston, my first full-time church was this church called New Colony Baptist Church, and Jack Parrott was my mentor, senior minister there.
Yeah.
So I was associate minister of students and something else. I don't remember what else I was doing at that point. And we had gotten to this place, so this doesn't really matter in the story, but I'll tell you anyway. So the Baptist world decided that they were going to invest multi-million-dollar amounts in different cities as an evangelistic tool to start new churches, to do new things over a 10-year period. And ours was called Hearts for Boston.
Okay.
And Jack, my senior minister, became the director of Hearts for Boston and our church. And so I was working at both of these places for multiple times, trying to give out $2 million, $3 million, and then this other thing. And my plate was super full. I was 20. I was young and dumb. And one Saturday, it must have been a Friday. It was my day off. So one Friday, I'm at the mall with my friend Melissa, who's another pastor in the church. And I get a call from Jack Parrott. And gives me this like honey-do list, right? Do all this. It's my day off, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
And John was a great leader.
Jack was?
Sorry, Jack.
Yeah.
Sorry, not John. Jack was a great leader, but he missed social cues sometimes, like days off and that sort of stuff. And so,
Or boundaries. Maybe you missed boundaries.
Yeah.
Social cues.
And so, in the midst of all that, like, he gives me this list, and I think I hung up,
Oh no.
right? This was in the days of flip phone where you could close your phone, but it would still be on.
Yep.
If you didn't put the
If
button.
it wasn't all the way.
Yeah, for the kids that are watching this, because there are maybe
Yeah,
a few
we
kids
could show
watching
you
this,
one
we
someday.
had flip phones back then.
I'm sure there's lots of kids watching.
And so I closed my phone, thought I had pushed the button, and then I went off like on a good 30-second rampage to Melissa. Like, what does he do? Would somebody just tell me what he does?
Yeah.
Because we don't bother him on his day off, blah, blah, blah. Well, then I looked down and my phone's still rolling.
So what'd you
And-
do? Did you open it back up?
No, I hit the end button.
You're like, we're done.
But, right, like, I'm dreading the next face-to-face because he was on. There was
Yeah,
no, like, he
really?
was saying things
Oh my.
in my pocket, hearing all of this. And so I go to work on Sunday. Sunday's normal because it's just what it is. And then I go to work on Monday. And John was one of those guys that... John,
Jack.
I keep going... Sorry. Similar name.
Yes.
Jack Parrott was one of these guys that, like, he was a hardcore studier, and he would study all week for his sermon. And you knew you could engage Jack when his door was open, but frequently you'd go in the office and his door was closed, especially on Monday.
Yeah.
Like, that was a very normal thing.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping the door's closed.
Yeah. Right.
So-
or you're gonna close it if it's
Right. So Monday I get there and the door is open. And one of my good friend's mom was the secretary, and she was like, Rustin, Jack would like to see you. And I was like, oh, crap. Right?
This is
Because
it. Yeah.
Jack didn't have a problem doing power over things either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So that was my fear, right? That we were going to have a similar pattern that we've had in previous engagements. And I walk in and we have this really decent conversation. And at the very end, all he said to me was, hey, you might want to make sure you turn your phone off when you end a conversation.
He didn't
Nothing.
engage you.
Didn't engage me, didn't, like, and he could have fired me.
Right.
Number one.
Right.
But he could have also, like, turned it into this big, huge lesson. I mean, it did become a lesson, right? Where now I make sure my phone's off.
Yeah.
But I also, like, so, like, he had this moment of trying, that he could have made conflict and he didn't. And for me, it was like, Jack was practicing gentleness with me. He knew I was a young clergy person that just made a stupid mistake.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it didn't need more than, like, he knew I was already processing that 1,000 times over the weekend. It didn't need more than him just saying, hey, just make sure you turn your phone.
Yeah. Right.
And I think, right, like, that's part of what
That's
Paul's
interesting.
kind of arguing for in this place is, I love the translation that Eugene does. Make it clear as you can, to everyone that you meet that you're on their side, working with them and not against them.
Yep.
That gentleness causes us, right, that we can add to each other's joy.
Yep.
And we can add to each other's pain. We can create more suffering. We can sow good in the world or we can sow bad in the world. And we can sow conflict or we can sow beauty. And so our call, part of what Paul is calling the church to, is to add to the joy of those that we're in life with. And quarantining is hard.
Definitely.
Right? It's a
Yeah.
hard space. So, I guess my first question, kind of adventure question in this moment is, like, how are you making it clear to those that you meet or those in your house
Mm-hmm.
or in your work environment that you're on their side, that you're for them and not against them?
Yeah. How do we add to their joy? Well, I think sort of back to your Jack story in some ways, I think what's interesting is you can be right. Like Jack would have been in the right? To
Totally.
reprimand you about that.
Totally.
But you can be right and not choose gentleness and actually start becoming wrong in your rightness. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So I do think it's about that slowing down. It's about, I have this tendency in our house to think I should insert myself into everything. You know, like particularly like on a day like today when I will have been gone for several hours, I'll go home and think I better get involved with the girls and I better see. And I've learned that the better thing to do is say, where are you guys at? What do you need? What's going on? You know, sort of just a gentle, just a different posture, I guess.
Totally. Well, and like, I think a big question, and you know I ask this question all the time, what's your end goal?
Yeah. Such a good question.
Right? Like, what is it you're trying to really achieve? Like, are you trying to achieve a harmonic home?
Yeah.
Because if you are, you'll live out gentleness differently.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, if I'm always trying to be right, I mean, that's my favorite thing my therapist has ever said to me is, Rustin, do you want to be right or do you want to be in a relationship?
That's so good.
You can't have both.
Yep.
And so I think sometimes thinking about the end of what we're trying to achieve really matters. And, you know, that's one of those moments where Jack did that. Like, Jack thought about what's the end, like, what am I trying to get out of this young minister?
Yeah.
And put aside his pride for a little bit, put aside 1,000 things he could have said in order to help build me. That's a very different posture.
Yeah,
and
it is.
It goes back to the very first part of the second chapter where Paul is articulating to this church, communal unity happens first by individual humility. Right? If I can humble myself enough, because that's what gentleness requires, right? Gentleness requires me believing that my power shouldn't be used over people, but alongside people.
Yes.
And that's a whole nother level of humility when you have the level of power where you can affect that kind of change.
Yeah.
And truthfully get your way whenever you want.
But for what? If it breaks things down, I think is what Paul's saying.
Exactly.
You know, if it breaks things down, it's not worth it.
When if the thing that the world knows about you is that these two factions of your church are fighting each other, why are you the church?
Yeah. They're not going to hear anything else.
You know? So, gentleness matters. I mean, that's really at the core of what we're trying to get at and what Paul's getting at in this space.
And I just can't say things like this enough. Our world has so few models of gentleness right now. So few. I mean, I think maybe one of the really beautiful models of gentleness that I am seeing are the nurses. You know, nurses in general are just these amazing people who tend to be the ones that have more time to exercise compassion and gentleness in the context of caring. And then also teachers, particularly in the ways my children are interacting on Zoom. I'm just amazed at their teachers' gentleness, particularly one of them. Actually, one of them has two teachers. One of them is so gentle and the other isn't. And
So
there's
you
a
really see the
huge difference in the way the kids respond and the way the kids stay engaged in a really hard medium for kids that are in third grade.
Yeah.
So
when I think
it's been
about,
powerful.
you know, just in these moments of when I've seen people be really kind to grocery workers and when I've seen people be really unkind to grocery workers, like they're the customer, they're right.
Yeah.
Like, why aren't you doing this the way I want you to be doing it, right? Like those, man, I mean, gentleness changes our way of being in the world.
Yeah, it does.
Like, we're a better world when we engage each other with gentleness.
But it takes more time, and it takes patience. You know, I mean, I think that's the power over piece is it's faster, it gets the point across, but I think the gentleness is the way to peace. And I always like to think about too, how do I want to be treated? I want to be treated gently, so I need to act gently. Otherwise, you sort of get back what you give out in some ways, particularly in relationships, I think. So
when I do think about, like, if I were to say what has been a 10-year journey for me as an Enneagram 8, and it's been this road. It's been like, okay, like, how do I not just plow through the world?
Yeah.
But how do I be who I am, but do so in a way that creates beauty instead of lots of burned buildings and bridges.
Yeah.
So, a venture question is how can you this week make it clear to all that you meet that you're on their side, working for them, not against them? And then secondly, what is, in relationship to that, what is one way that you can be more gentle in your home this week?
Yes.
Because our home often is the one who gets the worst of us.
Definitely.
In all of life.
Yes.
So you have a stop start?
Gosh, I'm bad with these this week, aren't I? What I like about that phrase in here where, we were talking about, remember their names are also in the book of life. That's sort of a writing the end of the story. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to stop writing the end of the story. That person is doing this because of, obviously, that way down the road. Do you know what I mean by that? So I'm going to stop doing that to be a little more gentle and to listen to what is happening instead of jumping to the conclusion of, oh my gosh, this is yet another example that this person is not doing X, Y, or Z. But to kind of flip that and be a listener and say what's really going on, what's really behind that.
Yeah, and mine's similar. Like I'm gonna intentionally stop using power over this week and use power alongside. Right? What are ways that I can use the power I have to further the lives and ministries of those around me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So may you experience the gentleness of God, and may you pour that gentleness out on all those that you meet this week. Go in peace.
That would change the world this week. That would be good.
Yes, it would.
Amen.
Amen.